Still with us, standing by in Austin, Texas, family law attorney Holly Davis. Okay, Holly, want to bring you in on a couple of things, please. Heard some asking the question of whether or not we could potentially see Britney suing her dad. And something that comes to my mind is maybe for something like intentional infliction of emotional distress. Might we see something like that one day? We know she publicly came out, said she wants him charged with what she called conservatorship abuse. I want you to weigh in, please. Do you think we might see a lawsuit coming from Britney down the road?
Absolutely. I think you could have a breach of fiduciary duty off the top of my head claim. But listen to this. This is quite interesting. Why were we surprised that Mr. Spears, Jamie's attorneys, were wanting to terminate the conservatorship? Well, it turns out that Britney's lawyer is wanting actually to delay that process of actually terminating his client's conservatorship because there's a mechanism within the existing conservatorship that allows Britney's lawyers to claim that there's abuse by the conservator. And so the financial records that would support that claim need to be turned over by Jamie Spears to Britney's attorneys in the next few weeks. And I think that's why we're finding that Britney Spears' attorneys cleverly asked for Jamie's conservatorship to be suspended, but then secondarily, that this case be continued to go on, be allowed to continue, so that the adequate records that might prove their case for that breach of fiduciary duty or gross mismanagement of the fiduciary obligation of a conservator could really be fully explored by Britney. So it's a really interesting legal issue. So yes, to answer your question, Julie, I think there could be a breach of fiduciary claim at the very least, but I think that there might also be a mechanism within the existing conservatorship whereby Britney can argue that there's been a gross abuse of power and a conflict of financial interest.
Yeah, I would really like to see an investigation opened up, and I mean by something like a law enforcement agency or maybe something like the California Attorney General's office, someone to look into what she says occurred. And we see these documentaries that just dropped. They're both really, really hot right now. I want to hone in on one in particular. We got some revelations in the one on Hulu right now called Controlling Britney Spears. It was produced by the New York Times. This is kind of a follow-up to the first one that they did on her, released maybe about 9 months ago. And there were some revelations that her dad directed her security team to record her secretly. This was just one of the things. As part of that, you mentioned fiduciary duty. And we know when, for instance, someone like the conservator and a conservatee, there's that kind of relationship, as is, in a lawyer-client relationship. There's that interest that always has to be protected of the person who is on the receiving end. The conservatee, Britney, the client, Britney. And this individual who was interviewed in the New York Times doc said that she was surveilled and even her lawyer conversations were recorded. Holly, I was appalled hearing that. I want to know what you think hearing that.
I was absolutely appalled. The sanctity of the attorney-client privileged conversations should be maintained at all times. What's really disgusting in this situation is that we've got certain egregious behavior. Recording a woman in her bedroom with her boyfriend, recording her conversations with her children, and recording her conversations with her attorney is all being done under the guise of being in the best interest of the conservatee, Britney. And really what we've got is an interesting legal question about how far does the boundaries of conservatorship go? Are you allowed to, as the conservator of a person, break their right to privacy or the right to have communications with their attorneys? I think the answer is no. And the question that is all on our minds is how much did the court know? How much did the court approve? I understand that in 2008, in order to get these sweeping and broad rights over Britney, something terrible had to have occurred. I think we can all assume that there was significant substance abuse. This is an assumption, but I think that we can all assume that there was significant substance abuse and mental health issues at play. And there was also possibly, I think, a threat that if Britney did not get a conservator, she might lose custody of her children. That's a very real threat. So I believe back in 2008, the situation must have been so bad that perhaps could have justified this extreme surveillance. But fast forward 13 more years, where we've got Britney consistently begging the court, and the court appointed investigators who visit her frequently as part of this conservatorship. She is constantly begging for some rights and freedom, telling everyone she's feeling oppressed and that she's depressed and that she's being medicated against her consent. This is the boundary, the extreme boundary of what the law allows in conservatorship. And I think we'll find now that there is a huge spotlight on Jamie's behavior and the advice that he was given about the boundaries of his control that create a huge problem, not only for conservatorships in California, but for conservatorships all across this country.
Yeah, and we have a look at the allegations being brought against Jamie Spears. Number one, that he secretly audio recorded Britney in her bedroom without her permission, that he accessed and recorded phone calls and mirrored text messages without her consent. They did that by way of an iPad, as we understand it, and then forced her to take medication and keep a birth control device in her body. She talked about having an IUD and wanting it to be removed so that she could have another baby when she was appearing in court in June remotely. So the world heard that, and it was just so sad and upsetting that, I mean, all of these decisions she has zero control over. But the one that really gets me is the wiretap violation. If this is true, I think Jamie Spears could be in a world of trouble because that is a crime in California. So we'll wait to see about that. Holly, I wanted to ask you about something else. You kind of touched on this in the documentary on Netflix called Britney versus Spears. One of the things that the filmmaker and the journalist that she collaborated with dug into was how this conservatorship began, right? And you were saying that, you know, this is an assumption, but maybe some mental health issues were at play. We know it's hard to know because these documents have been sealed. So many of these court documents are under seal. We can't see them, but they obtained some documents. And on one of them, my jaw dropped when it said that part of I guess the reason for the start of the conservatorship, it was kind of the standard on the form that indicated the need for it, and that was dementia. There was a box that said dementia that was checked off as the reason. And I mean, that just stunned me. And they tried to interview a doctor who supposedly did the initial evaluation, a geriatric psychologist, and when he realized they were wanting to ask him about Britney Spears, he would not acknowledge that he ever treated her in any way or evaluated her in any way, shape, or form. What goes through your mind when you see dementia marked on that form, please, Holly?
Well, a couple things, Julie, go through my mind. In the very beginning of the case, when things are hot and heavy and emergency, we really find in most court cases, be they conservatorships or family law or even criminal cases, there is not a rush to judgment, but there is, and not an exaggeration, but there is a desperate way to show the court that this is something outside of the norm. It needs to get emergency attention, and it needs to really be addressed immediately. And so what goes through my mind as a trial lawyer is that perhaps there was an overly aggressive or an appropriate checking of the box of dementia. I also know that when certain substance abuse is occurring in an individual, there could be substance abuse induced, and I'm obviously not a medical expert, but there can be situations where you can have, substance abuse triggered mental health problems, which obviously would, heal themselves over time if the person gains sobriety and follows the directions of their mental health provider. So I think that in the beginning, dementia is a very interesting word, and we're going to have to explore that. But that could be a reason why these records are sealed. And keep in mind that Jamie Spears' attorney has threatened or made reference to these sealed documents, saying that Jamie Spears did the best job he could with given the significantly dangerous facts that caused everything to start in 2008. And I think that's a little bit of a threat and a knock to Britney's attorneys to say, hey, listen, if you think this is abuse, then maybe we should get all the facts out. That might be very embarrassing to Britney. Mm-hmm. But from what I can hear from her testimony, I think she might be just fine with that. That's one strategy to consider, is to say, listen, if we're really drilling down to what happened here, I'm going to own everything that caused this conservatorship so that I can prove it's no longer necessary.
Mm-hmm. Sure. One thing I do want to touch on, in California, the way the probate law is set up, the conservatorship has two parts: the conservator of the estate and the conservator of the person. And it seems that Britney's been pretty satisfied with the conservator of her person, Jody Montgomery. It seems that she really hasn't had any complaints about her, although she was initially court appointed. It seems like she's pretty pleased. Holly, I want you to weigh in. Do you think we're going to see the arrangement continue with Jody?
I think temporarily. I think Jody's going to be looked to as well as the temporary CPA. He's been appointed now, as of yesterday, the conservator of Britney's estate. I think we're going to see the court look to both of these conservators to give the thumbs up on this conservatorship ending. And please note that Jody was appointed in 2019, I believe, after Britney had been, um, sent to a mental health place, which she claims is against her will. And so I think Brittany might be satisfied with what has been occurring with her temporary conservator of her body, Jody, because it was really on the heels of her father putting her in a mental health facility against her will at the end of a promotional tour, I think. So I think we'll be looking to what Jody has to say as well as the CPA. And I would be surprised if they were going to argue or testify that further conservatorship is needed. I think really on November 12th, we'll be looking to those conservators to uh, give a thumbs up and a green light to the termination of the entire conservatorship. So really, this is a matter of Britney just hanging in there and no other mistakes or obstacles or missteps or mishaps occurring between now and November 12th.
Yeah, I was gonna. Last question for you, Holly. If you think this is going to be over and it will end entirely in November, do you think so?
I do, and it should. I mean, how many Hollywood celebrities have ultimate freedom to make terrible decisions with their finances, with their sexual partners, with their families, and with their bodies? And so it's been 13 years for Britney, and it's been an egregious misuse of power, I believe, from a legal perspective on her dad's part. And it's time for this to end so that she can make her own decisions as all other Hollywood celebrities do, whether or not we agree with them or not.
Absolutely. I completely agree. She can still have a lot of people helping her out just voluntarily, so she can find whomever she wants to serve as her accountant, therapist, life coach, whatever she needs. She can do that, just doesn't need it to be court mandated.